The first thing Adaeze noticed about him was that he wasn't watching her. Everyone else at Maison 42 was. The moment Marcus pulled out her chair with that elaborate, performative courtesy, every eye in the room found her. Polished walnut walls, amber light, wait staff who used your name from the reservation like a rehearsed trick, the kind of restaurant Marcus deployed when he wanted her grateful. She'd worn the emerald dress, the one he'd pointed at in a boutique window 3 weeks ago, and said, "You should get that." She spoke Marcus fluently now. That sentence meant, "I want to walk in with a woman wearing that dress." 2 years of fluency. The table held 8 of his people. Devon, who laughed before Marcus finished his sentences. Britt, a colleague who looked at Adaeze with a particular kind of recalibration, not hostility. Something more complicated. Jin, a Korean-American associate from Atlanta, watching everything from behind wire-rimmed glasses. Landon, who'd brought a date who couldn't stop touching her necklace. Adaeze did what she always did. She listened beautifully. She asked about Devon's condo renovation, Britt's Chicago transfer, Landon's new venture. She watched each person bloom under her attention. She was the woman who made everyone else feel seen so that Marcus could be the man who brought her. Across the room, a man sat alone at a corner table, dark jacket, untouched water glass, a legal brief open in front of him, held at a slight angle, the particular angle of a man whose attention was elsewhere. She noted him. She returned to the table. At 8:45, Britt asked, "Are you still doing design consulting? Or has it transitioned into something more serious?" Something more serious. The phrase landed small and mean in Adaeze's chest. 4 years. 3 clients built from zero to flagship presence. She opened her mouth to answer. "She's doing some freelance things," Marcus said, pivoting immediately to his own project pipeline. Adaeze stopped speaking mid-sentence. 1 second of silence. Britt looked between them, registered something, and followed Marcus's turn. Adaeze lifted her wine glass and took a sip she didn't taste. Across the table, Jin's gaze moved to her face, and then quickly away, giving her the dignity of not being witnessed while she managed it. At 9:15, she leaned close to Marcus while the second round of appetizers arrived. "And I'd appreciate it if you let me finish when I'm speaking." "I wasn't interrupting." His voice dropped to that low, private register, the one that sounded like intimacy and functioned like control. "I was helping you. You were taking too long. You should be thanking me." She looked at him. "I'm serious, Ada." She set down her wine glass with extraordinary care. "Do not do that again." Marcus's face moved through 3 expressions in under a second. The last one wasn't anger. She could manage anger. It was the cold certainty of a man who had never been corrected by a woman in front of an audience and was now calculating what to do about it. He stood up. He pulled her to her feet by her arm, not brutal, but absolute, and walked her 4 steps toward the host stand. His voice dropped 3 degrees. "You want to embarrass me? In front of my people? You embarrassed me, I'm naming it. Lower your voice." "I'm not raising my voice, Marcus." He raised his hand. He didn't strike her. The hand went up, arced and stopped, held there by calculation or restraint or simply the reality of the room around them. But the angle was unmistakable. 3 phones rose at nearby tables, the reflexive speed of a generation that documents first. A hand closed around Marcus's wrist from behind. 1 hand. Quiet. Absolute. Marcus turned. The man from the corner table stood there. Medium height, lean, early 40s, silver beginning at his temples. He wasn't imposing. He was still, the stillness of someone who has already decided what he's about to do and is simply doing it. His eyes looked at Marcus with total, unblinking attention, the assessment of a person who has sized something up completely and found it exactly as significant as expected. He held Marcus's wrist without squeezing. The geometry of the grip made it clear the wrist was going nowhere until he decided otherwise. "Put it down." Barely above a murmur, the register of someone accustomed to being heard. Marcus's mouth opened, nothing came out. "Now." Same volume, same absolute calm. "Then you're going to step back." Marcus's arm dropped. His body stepped back before his pride could stop it. The man released his wrist and turned directly to Adaeze, looking at her the way no one else had looked at her all evening. Not performed attention, not sideways discomfort. He looked at her as though she was the only thing in the room that mattered, taking in her trembling hands, her jaw, the controlled effort in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Direct, like he actually needed the answer. She looked at him. She looked at Marcus, standing 2 feet away, wearing an expression she was filing somewhere permanent. Rage and fear in combination, a thing she'd never seen from him. She looked at Jin, who had stood from the table. "I'd like to leave," she said. The man nodded once and moved toward the entrance, leaving a space she understood without being told was hers. She picked up her clutch. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the phones. She walked. "Adaeze." Marcus's voice cracked behind her, that specific note of a man losing something he considered his. "Adaeze, we are not done." She kept walking. Outside, Atlanta in September was warm and thick with heat that never left until October. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed, one deep breath, and let her hands stop shaking. The man came out 30 seconds later. He stood a few feet away and looked at the street, not at her, hands loose at his sides. "My car's around the corner," he said. "I can call you one instead if you prefer." She studied him. "What's your name?" He glanced at her. Solomon Kwame. I'm an attorney. I was here for a deposition prep. Client canceled. I was about to leave when..." He stopped himself, looked at the street. "I noticed things weren't right at your table. About 45 minutes ago. You were watching." I was concerned. She looked at the dress Marcus had chosen. She thought about 2 years, about the word helping, about the word favor, about the angle of a raised hand. "I'd appreciate the car," she said. He pulled out his phone. 90 seconds. He didn't fill the silence with anything. He simply stood in the warm Atlanta night and let her exist in the quiet without requiring her to account for herself. She noticed this the way you notice something your body had forgotten it needed. The car arrived. He opened the door. She got in, then looked back at him, standing on the sidewalk in his dark jacket, silver at his temples catching the streetlight, legal brief tucked under his arm. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her directly. "Take care of yourself." Not a pleasantry. A genuine instruction, the weight of someone who meant every word they said. She closed the door. She made it through the lobby, through the elevator, through her front door, through getting her shoes off, through setting her clutch on the counter. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the island and cried. Not the controlled tears she'd refused to give Marcus, not the dignified containment of a woman who knows cameras are watching. She cried the way you cry when you've been carrying weight so long you've forgotten its weight, and it finally falls, all at once, the whole accumulated sum of 2 years. Being interrupted, being repositioned, being decorated, being managed. She cried for the raised hand, for the dinner, for the version of Marcus she had decided to love, which she understood now had been an act of imagination. A portrait painted onto a man whose actual face was something else entirely. When her body finished, she got up, washed her face, stood at the mirror for a long time. She called Marcus at 11 to preempt the 40 calls she knew were coming. "We're done," she said when he picked up. "Ada, you're overreacting. You raised your hand at me. I didn't touch you. Marcus." Her voice was even. You raised your hand at me in a restaurant where people were recording. Whatever conversation you're trying to have right now, I'm not participating in it." She paused. "I'm hanging up and blocking this number. If you come to my building, the doorman has instructions." She hung up. She blocked the number. She lay in the dark and thought about Solomon Kwame. "I was concerned," said like the simplest sentence in the English language. Standing on the sidewalk, performing nothing, not waiting for gratitude, not positioning himself as a rescuer. Just there, doing the necessary thing. Stepping back and letting her decide. She thought about that for a long time. In the morning, 12 missed calls from unknown numbers, 14 texts from mutual friends who'd seen the video. 2 videos, actually. Different angles. The one spreading fastest was 47 seconds that ended with Adaeze walking out of Maison 42, clutch in hand, back straight, chin up, composed as architecture. Comments flooded in from 6 languages. The clip of the man in the dark jacket gripping Marcus's wrist had its own life online. "Who is this man?" appeared 16,000 times overnight. Priya texted at 7:30, "Okay, but the way you walked. Like you were the only solid thing in the room." Her mother called at 8. "I saw it." "I know, Mama." "The hand." "I know." A silence containing a great deal. And then, "Are you well?" "I will be." "Yes, you will." Another beat. "Who is the man?" "A stranger." Her mother made a sound, not disbelief, something more precise, the sound of a woman cataloging information. "He was not a stranger to that restaurant. Watch how the staff moved when he stood. That is not how people move for a stranger." She paused. "Find out who he is." "Mama, I am not doing that." "I didn't say pursue the man. I said find out who he is. They are not the same instruction." Jin texted at 9:15. "Hey, checking in on you. Also, the man who intervened. Do you know who he is?" She didn't. "Solomon Kwame," Jin wrote. "Senior partner at Kwame and Associates. Corporate litigation, but he takes civil rights cases pro bono. Big wrongful termination win at the circuit level 3 years ago. He's not famous, but certain rooms just know him. Marcus knows the name. I watched his face when he read the article this morning." A pause. "Marcus is not having a good day." 11 days later, the coffee shop downstairs from her Ponce City Market studio sent up her usual order with a note from the barista. "Your 11 o'clock is already here, and he says not to rush you." She had no 11 o'clock. She went down. Solomon Kwame sat at the corner table with a coffee and a yellow legal pad. He wrote in a left-handed slant, legible, contained. He looked up when she stopped at his table and stood, not as ceremony, but as reflex, something from somewhere older. "I apologize for coming here unannounced," he said. "I wanted to check on you and I had no way to reach you." "How did you find this office?" "Your design work. Atlanta Magazine last year. It listed your studio." He paused. "I'm aware that arriving at your workplace is—" "It's fine," she said. She sat. He sat. In daylight, he looked different from the amber of the restaurant. Still by default, not blank, the way deep water is still, everything moving underneath. Silver at his temples. A small scar at the corner of his left jaw, barely visible, old. "How are you?" he said. "Honest answer or manageable answer?" He held her gaze. "Whichever you'd like to give." "Honest. I've been better. I've also been worse. I'm somewhere in the middle of a thing that will resolve into fine. I just haven't reached fine yet." He nodded. He looked at his coffee. "The video," she said. "Did you see it?" "Yes." "People want to know who you are." "I've noticed." "Does that bother you?" He considered this. "No. It would bother me if I'd done something worth regretting." A pause. "I don't regret it." She studied him. Hands flat on the table, Nothing angling toward her, no performed posture, simply sitting across from her with the particular ease of someone who has never needed external validation to know where they stood. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you wait 45 minutes before coming over?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because it wasn't my place to intervene sooner. You were managing the situation. You didn't need me managing it for you. When it escalated to something else, that's when I stood up." She looked at him for a long time. "That is a very unusual answer," she said. "Is it? Most people would have rushed over immediately and performed themselves as a rescuer." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, and the shadow of one. "I'm not interested in performing anything." She believed him. It matched every data point she'd collected. The sidewalk, the timing, the instruction he'd given her at the car door. "I have a coffee shop I work from," she said. "Saturday mornings, the one on Auburn Avenue near the MLK Historic Site. I'm there most weeks." He looked at her. "So am I. Usually." She picked up her coffee. "Then I suppose we'll see each other there." "I suppose we will." She went back upstairs. She managed, for approximately 12 minutes, to think about the Culinary Collective rebrand before giving up and thinking about Solomon Kwame instead. The coffee shop on Auburn Avenue was called Still Point, either deeply pretentious or deeply correct, depending on Adaeze's mood. The owner, Mrs. Celestine, was 68, from New Orleans. Our move to Atlanta in 1987. She played Nina Simone on Saturday mornings and knew every regular by name and preferred beverage with the comprehensive warmth of someone who considered her cafe a form of community service. Solomon was there the following Saturday. They didn't greet each other as if encountering something surprising. They acknowledged each other the way people do who expect to find each other in the same place, a nod, a look, and then, when a second chair opened at his table, she carried her coffee and sketchbook over and sat down. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," she said. They worked in parallel for 20 minutes, the comfortable silence of people who don't need to perform interaction. The espresso machine, Mrs. Celestine's voice from the counter, Nina Simone threading through it. "I got life, mother/I got laughs," to sister. "What are you working on?" he asked eventually, nodding at the sketchbook. She turned it toward him. Logo variations for the Culinary Collective, quick pen work, the looseness of a hand thinking faster than precision. He studied the page. "That one." He pointed to the fourth variation on the left. "The negative space in the center does the most work." "How do you know that?" "My mother was a graphic designer. She talked about negative space the way other parents talked about homework." The corner of his mouth moved. "I absorbed it without trying. Where is she now?" "She passed in 2019. Cancer." He said it with the calm of someone who has made peace with a wound, not unaffected, not performing grief either. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He looked at his coffee. "She would have liked that logo. She'd have told me to tell you to use it and stop second-guessing." Adaeze looked at the fourth variation. She put a small star next to it and moved on. They talked, in increments with comfortable pauses, about their work, about Atlanta, about the texture of a city you've spent years learning. He'd grown up in Decatur, Morehouse, then Howard Law, then D.C. before coming back. She'd grown up in Kennesaw, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who made their home the most specific and intentional place she'd ever known. SCAD in Savannah, 3 years in New York, then Atlanta pulling her back. "Why Atlanta?" he asked. "Because it felt like home kept trying to tell me something and I kept not listening. At some point you get tired of not listening." He looked at her steadily. "What was it trying to tell you?" "That the things worth building take more time than New York lets you give them." He nodded slowly from the inside. "Same time next Saturday?" she said when they both stood to leave. I'll be here." She walked back to her car on Auburn Avenue with Nina Simone still in her ears and something small and stubborn and warm in her chest that she wasn't ready to name. Marcus appeared at her studio building on a Tuesday in October. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, the particular tiredness of a narrative collapsing around you. "I need to talk to you." "We've talked." "Ada." His voice carried that careful, managed quality he used when he needed something. "Two of my clients have gone quiet. The Hartman Group moved my deal back. Jin put in a transfer request last week. All of it started after that restaurant." He paused. "Is it him? Kwame? Do you know what kind of litigation he does? The people he knows?" "You raised your hand at me," she said. He stopped. "In a restaurant. On camera. You raised your hand at me, and the only thing standing between you and what came next was the restraint of a man you'd never met." She held his gaze. "Whatever is happening to your professional life, Marcus, you start the accounting there." His jaw tightened. Something rawer moved behind his eyes. "I still love you. I need you to know that." "I know you believe that." Something in her chest ached, not for the man in front of her, but for the version she had decided he was. "That's what makes it sad." She went inside. She told Solomon on Saturday. He listened without interrupting, and his hands flat on the table around his coffee cup. "Did you—" she started. "Yes, clean, direct. You should have told me." "You're right." He held her gaze. "I should have. I won't make that mistake again." She studied him. The lack of justification, the absence of the elaborate explanation men typically construct when caught doing something they know they shouldn't have. He simply acknowledged it and let it sit there. "In the future," she said, "if you do something that involves my life, I need to know first. That's a condition of anything between us." Something shifted in his face, a subtle opening, at the phrase, "anything between us." "I understand," he said. "Completely." She believed him. Not from naivety. She was 34 and had been careful about people for most of that time. She believed him because in every exchange across these weeks, he had not said a single word he didn't mean. She reached across and covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm up and held it. "Tell me something about when you were a boy," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I had a paper route in Decatur until I was 13, 4 a.m. every Saturday. My mother left a cup of coffee on the counter for when I came back, and we'd sit in the kitchen and she'd show me her sketches." He looked at their hands. "All those variations, negative space." She said design was the art of knowing what to remove. Adaeze looked at him for a long time. "Same time next week," she said. "Always," he said. The trouble escalated in November. She came home on a Monday evening to an envelope waiting at the front desk. Inside, a photograph of her leaving Pont City Market. Long lens taken from across the street, the kind of image that communicates "I know where you are." Below it, a single handwritten line. "Tell Solomon Kwame this city has a long memory." She stood in the lobby with the photograph and felt the cold, specific fear of being watched without knowing it. She called Solomon. He answered before the second ring. "Read it to me," he said. She read it. 3 seconds of silence. "Don't go upstairs alone. I'm 20 minutes away." He was there in 18. He came through the lobby and looked at her first. A quick, thorough inventory, then crossed to the front desk and picked up the photograph. She watched something happen in him. Not anger. Cooler than anger. The stillness of a person running calculations. "I know who sent this," he said. He explained it without softening. 3 years ago, he'd won a civil rights case. A black teacher wrongfully terminated by a county school system, a circuit-level verdict that cost the defendant's counsel his partnership and his largest client. That client had moved to Atlanta 18 months ago. His name was Bryce Whitfield. Mid-50s, old money. A man who had lost something important and had never forgiven the person he'd decided to blame. "He sent this to reach you," Solomon said. "He thinks you're the fastest way to get an emotional response from me. An emotional response gives him material. A precise response ends it." "What does a precise response look like?" "I have an apartment in Candler Park. Private parking, guest entrance, 2 staff I've known for 15 years. I'd like you to stay there for a few days while I handle this." She looked at her own image in the photograph, herself crossing a pavement she crossed every day, completely unsuspecting. She looked at Solomon. "You already had this arranged," she said. "I made arrangements after the first Saturday," he said. "I should have told you that. I'm telling you now." "That's you trying," she said. "It is." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not afraid of him. I want to be clear. I'm not going to spend my life organizing myself around men who see me as a pressure point." Something moved in his eyes. Warm, completely unguarded. "I know. But I'll stay in Candler Park. Because it's practical." He crossed the lobby and stood in front of her and put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her with an expression she had no clean category for. The look of a person about to say something they have been holding for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said, "that this reached you, that being near me has a cost you didn't sign up for." "I sign up for things I choose," she said. "Let me choose." He looked at her, then he kissed her. Soft and careful and entirely unhurried, one hand coming up to the side of her face. Her hands found the front of his jacket and held on. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. Both of them stood there in the lobby with the photograph on the desk and the city outside. "Pack a bag," he said quietly. "I know," she said. He handled Bryce Whitfield in 4 steps, a conversation, brief and formal, in the tone that said, "I know exactly how large this could get, and I'm choosing, for now, to keep it small." A pre-suit preservation notice on the photograph as evidence of civil harassment. A call from Solomon's former clerkship judge, now senior on the 11th Circuit, who reached out purely as a professional courtesy to note that certain patterns of behavior tended to land badly before certain courts. And a private meeting, 40 minutes, no record. He understood, Solomon told her the following Saturday. What specifically did he understand? That the appropriate response to a verdict he didn't like was to rebuild, not to reach into people's personal lives. He paused, and that if he reached again, the next response would be different in kind. She looked at him across the table at Still Point. Coffee, morning light, Mrs. Celestine's Nina Simone behind them. "Can I ask you something difficult?" she said. "Yes." "Are you a good man?" "Not in the easy sense, I can see that. In the complicated sense, the one that matters." He looked at the table. He looked at her. "I try to be. I don't always succeed. I make decisions I can defend and some I can't." He paused. "But I try to be honest about the difference. I try not to convince myself the ones I can't defend are actually defensible." She looked at him for a long time. "That might be the most honest answer I've ever heard to that question," she said. His mouth did the thing she'd been cataloging since the first Saturday, the almost smile, the shadow of warmth that stopped just short of completing itself. She reached across and covered his hand. He turned his palm up and held hers, and the weight of what she understood about him settled into something that felt like bedrock. In December, he took her to his mother's favorite restaurant in Sweet Auburn, Magnolia's, open since 1974. The owner, Ms. Rose, greeted Solomon with the warmth of someone completing a gesture that had started long ago. "She would have liked you," Solomon said over dinner. "My mother." "What makes you say that?" She had a system for assessing people. She watched how they listened, not whether they were quiet while someone talked. That's different. Whether they were actually taking in what was being said. He looked at her. You actually listen. Adaeze held his gaze across the small table in the warm amber of magnolias at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. I had a good teacher, she said. My mother, she used to say the most powerful thing you can give someone is your actual attention. Not your performance of attention, your actual attention. Yes, he said. Exactly that. They looked at each other and something had shifted. A threshold crossed, a careful distance closed, and what was on the other side was warm and specific, and entirely unlike anything she had felt before. I need to tell you something, she said. Yes. I'm not easy. I'm particular, and I have opinions, and I will not manage myself down for someone else's comfort. Not anymore. She held his gaze. If that's going to be a problem, it's not. Solomon. Adaeze. He said her name like he'd been weighing it. The first thing I noticed about you, that night before any of this started, was that you were refusing to make yourself smaller. In a room full of people watching and recording, you sat with your spine straight and your chin up, and you were not going to give any of them the collapse they were waiting for. He paused. That is not a quality I want to manage. That is a quality I want to be near. She looked at her wine, at her hands, at him. Okay, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. The restaurant went warm around them. In February, her mother Chidinma came to Atlanta. 61, Enugu-born, retired professor of comparative literature, me never offered an opinion she wouldn't argue until dawn, which Adaeze had learned was not a flaw, but a form of love. Adaeze brought Solomon to the house in Kennesaw on a Sunday. Chidinma looked at him across the kitchen table with the comprehensive assessment of a woman who had spent 40 years reading texts and people and did not confuse the two. She asked about his work, his family, his mother. He answered directly. No performance, no calculated charm. When he spoke about his mother, his voice changed by a fraction, a loosening that was grief and tenderness combined. Chidinma noticed. Adaeze watched her mother notice. After Solomon left, Chidinma sat with both hands around a cup of tea. He doesn't try to take up more space than he needs, her mother said. No, he doesn't. That is very rare. And very hard to fake for any length of time. She paused. Your father is calling from Lagos this evening. I'll tell him. Tell him what, Mama? We haven't... I'll tell him there's someone worth knowing. That is enough for now. She sipped her tea. Bring him back in the spring. On a Saturday in March, the light still deciding what it wanted to be, Adaeze sat at Still Point with her sketchbook open and a cortado beside it. She was working on a personal project she kept only for Saturdays, ideas no client had requested, buildings she invented for the pleasure of it. She felt the shift in the air when Solomon sat down. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she'd never quite seen from him, warm and entirely undefended, the careful stillness present, but no longer doing the work of protection. Something underneath it, open and looking directly at her. He set a small box on the table. She looked at it. She looked at him. Adaeze, he said. Solomon, she said. I've been thinking about how to do this correctly for 3 months. I've written approaches and dismissed them. I've tried to find words precise enough and specific enough and... He stopped. And I've realized that trying to find the perfect language for this is just a way of delaying it, because I am in certain specific ways afraid. Of what? Of how much I mean this? He held her gaze. I have not meant anything this much in a very long time. You are particular and opinionated, and you will not be managed, and every day I am more grateful for all 3 of those things. He paused. Will you marry me? She looked at the box. She looked at him. She looked around Still Point. At Mrs. Celestine behind the counter, at the Nina Simone photograph on the wall, at the table where they had spent the better part of a year finding each other. She reached across and opened the box herself. The ring was simple and exactly right, chosen by someone who had been paying attention. "Yes," she said. He placed it on her finger with both hands. She looked at it and felt her eyes fill, not the restrained tears of a restaurant a lifetime ago. The full, unguarded tears of a woman receiving something she had earned through loss and clarity, and the specific courage of trying again. "Hey," he said, voice low and slightly worried. She looked up. She laughed through the tears. "Good kind. The only kind." He looked at her with his version of undone, composure present but no longer load-bearing, and she thought, "I have spent this whole year watching you hold yourself together, and I'm going to spend the rest of our lives learning what you look like when you don't have to." "Mrs. Celestine," she called out. From behind the counter without turning, "I heard it, baby. I've been waiting 6 months." Mrs. Celestine turned, face full of the satisfaction of a woman who has been right about something and has the grace not to say so directly. She raised her coffee cup. "About time." Solomon looked at Adaeze. She knew? Everyone knew. The corner of his mouth moved, further than it ever had, further than she'd ever seen it go. And then, completely and fully and without any containment at all, he smiled. The real one. The unguarded one. The one that changed everything about his face and made him look like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had finally, on a Saturday morning in March, put it down. She put both hands on his face. She kissed him in the middle of Still Point while Mrs. Celestine switched from Nina Simone to Etta James because the occasion called for an upgrade. They married on a Saturday in October, a garden in Piedmont Park. The leaves just beginning to turn, the light the color of old gold. 30 people, everyone who mattered. Her mother wore deep purple and wept openly from the moment Adaeze appeared, and told anyone who caught her eye that this was entirely her right. Priya stood beside her all morning and said very seriously at one point, "I am taking partial credit for this." Adaeze allowed it. Solomon's father, a retired Ghanaian-American physician from Decatur who had spent 40 years studying what was true and what was false, shook Adaeze's hand and said, "My son has not smiled like that in a very long time. Don't let him forget how." She looked across the garden at Solomon's face in the October light, completely, unguardedly open. "I don't think either of us will," she said. Jin was there, having left Marcus's firm 6 months ago to join a civil rights litigation group Solomon had helped him find. He toasted them at the reception with the expression of a man who was genuinely happy and quietly satisfied that the story had landed here. Mrs. Celestine drove up from Auburn Avenue with a coffee cake and parked herself next to Solomon's father and spent the reception telling him the story of the first Saturday. Adaeze walked through the garden in a dress the color of deep wine, structured, full length, herself in every detail. She'd looked at ivory and cream and set them aside. Her mother had seen it on the hanger and said simply, "Yes, that is my daughter." Solomon stood at the end of the path and watched her come toward him, and his face did what it had done only a handful of times in the whole year of knowing her. That complete opening, every layer released, leaving only the man underneath who loved her with every deliberate and thoroughly considered part of himself. She reached him. She took both his hands. "You're looking at me like that again," she said. "Like what?" he said. "Like I'm the only solid thing in the room." He squeezed her hands. "You are." They made their promises in English and in Igbo, one the language of the city that held their story, one hers, and both now belonged to the life they were choosing together. 3 years later, on a Saturday morning in April, Adaeze sat at the table by the window in Still Point. Mrs. Celestine had placed the extra cushion on the chair across from her without being asked. Some things had simply become understood. Sketchbook open, coffee beside it. Across from her, in the cushioned chair, a small girl of 2 years and 9 months ate a croissant with the serious concentration of someone who considered the task important. Flakes distributed across the table with cheerful indifference. She looked up at Adaeze periodically with eyes that were entirely her father's, steady, attending to everything with quiet thoroughness. And her name was Amara, Grace. When Adaeze had said it, Solomon had gone quiet in the particular way of a person taking something in fully. Then he'd said, yes, that was the whole conversation. No more was needed. Amara set down the last piece of croissant. She looked at the door. Daddy? She said. He's coming, Adaeze said. The door opened. Solomon walked in from the April morning, jacket off at the door, looking across the room for his people. When he found them, something in his face settled into the expression she had spent years learning, the expression of a man who has arrived at the place that makes everything else make sense. He sat down. He looked at Amara, who pointed at the table with the gravity of a prosecutor. Croissant. I ate it. I can see, he said. All of it, she said. I see that too. He picked her up and she leaned back against his chest with the complete, boneless confidence of a child who has never once doubted that the arms holding her will hold. He looked at Adaeze over the top of their daughter's head. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. He reached across the table, past the coffee cups, past the croissant flakes, past the open sketchbook, and placed his hand over hers. Just that. His fingers over hers, briefly. The way you touch something you are grateful is still there. She turned her hand over and held his. Mrs. Celestine looked across Still Point at the table by the window and felt, as she did every Saturday morning, the specific satisfaction of a woman who has watched something good take root in a place she loves and had the grace to leave it room to grow. Outside on Auburn Avenue, Atlanta moved in the April light, warm and ordinary and entirely itself. Inside, the coffee was still hot, the music was playing, everything that mattered was accounted for. Was Solomon's intervention justice, or was it a powerful man using his power and calling it love? Drop your answer in the comments. I want yours. Jasmine.